I call the committee of the whole meeting to order for Monday, September 15th, 2025. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda of the committee of the whole meeting of Monday, September 15th, 2025? Councillor Ray, Councillor Statsky. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, we have two items on today's agenda from Engineering and Development Services Department. The first one is an update of the development cost charge bylaw, and the second is the subdivision and development servicing bylaw update. We have today representatives from Urban Systems with us this morning, Joel Short and Helene Miles. Welcome to the meeting, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Okay, I'd like to share my screen here with the presentation. So let me just make sure that this is going to happen. Okay, can you see my screen with the presentation on it?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you very much for your time this morning. We basically what we're aiming for is to spend about 2 hours on the DCC update and about an hour on the subdivision servicing bylaw. So what I'd like to do is to start off the presentation here on the development cost charges. In terms of an overview of the presentation, what we'd like to do is to do a bit of a refresher, background refresher on development cost charges, then talk a bit about the updated structure and some of the options in terms of new legislation and secondary suites. We've got some information on the updated DCC rates and the project cost estimates. And then we've also got some community comparisons, and we've also got some options to consider in terms of different approaches to the rates. And then we'd also like to talk about the interest costs for water projects. That's an option in terms of possibility that you can include interest costs. Then talk about DCC exemptions and also the project timeline. Oh yeah, I should also note that we have Georgia Smith on the line. She's taking notes of your discussion. That's also from Urban, in addition to Elaine Miles. There's Georgia taking notes, just so you can see. Okay, thanks. And we've got Elaine Miles, whose main focus is the subdivision servicing bylaw. Okay, anyways, on with the presentation. So in terms of a bit of a background refresher, what we'd like to do is I'd like to just talk a little bit about the key drivers for the update. So some of the key drivers are that there's a new official community plan that we need to respect and implement. There's a sanitary master plan that's nearing completion. A water master plan has been amended to add fire flows. There's a new transportation master plan, and we've got some new provincial legislation that encourages infill, like secondary suites, accessory dwelling units, and triplexes and fourplex type units. There's also some updated growth projections based on the new BC Housing Needs Assessment, and we want to ensure that growth is aligned with concurrent capital project modeling and want to be reflecting infrastructure needs and costs. And there's also a few more DCC eligible projects. So just as, and some of you have been through this already, but some of you might be a little newer to it, and it's always good to get a bit of a refresher. So what are DCCs? Well, they're like this one-time charge to pay for major transportation, water, drainage, and parks and protective services and solid waste capital projects which provide a common benefit to the community. And it's regulated by the province, the Local Government Act, and that legislation was revised in 2024, and the provincial DCC Best Practices Guide, which was updated in 2025 to go with that new legislation. Now, it's important to understand what DCCs can pay for and what they can't pay for. So DCCs can be used for infrastructure and studies needed to support growth. So we're talking transportation, water, drainage, sewer, and under parks, parkland acquisition and park improvements. And these are some new things that were added, facilities for fire protection, police, solid waste, and recycling facilities. Now, in terms of what they can't be paid for, they can't be paid for infrastructure needed for existing development. You can't pay for utility service connections, operations and staffing costs, any type of rolling stock like vehicles or fire trucks or garbage trucks. You also can't pay for maintenance and replacement costs or community buildings like libraries and recreation centers. Although now there's a new tool called an amenity cost charge that can be used for those types of things, but you can't use DCCs for those. And DCCs essentially must be all the projects that you're paying for with DCCs need to be growth related. Now, in terms of the process, DCCs are really like a technical process put through a political lens. So in terms of what we do is we estimate the growth, then we determine the capital projects, and then we take a look at the benefit to new development for each one of those capital projects, and we'll touch on that a little bit further in the presentation. And then we allocate the costs across various land uses, across commercial, industrial, institutional land uses. And then we determine the municipal assist factor, which we're going to talk about as well. And then we calculate the DCC rates. And then we review those rates with council, which is one of the steps that we're taking now. And then we engage with the development community, get their thoughts and input, and the general public. And then it moves to 3 readings of the DCC bylaw and approval by the province. The province needs to approve the development cost charge bylaw. The inspector of municipality needs to review it, and that usually takes 2 or 3 months, and then it comes back for bylaw adoption. So that's the overall process. In terms of the recoverable costs, we have a total project cost, so we'll identify a total project cost, and then we will take a look at the benefit allocation, and that's how much of that project benefits new development. And then we subtract off the municipal assist factor, which is really a subsidy and assistance provided to new development, and then that gives you the proportion of the total project cost. So if we have an example here, looking at from the developer contribution perspective, suppose you have $1 million project and 35% of that project is allocated to growth, and we have a 1% assist, which is what you've got now on the on projects. So we got 35% of $1,350,000, 1% assist, 3,500. So you end up with 346,500 that the developer is paying for that as their part of the project. And then the municipal contribution for this project, and suppose it's 65% allocated to existing, and you've got the 1% assist that the municipality is paying, that ends up being 653,500. So you can see it depends on a number of factors. You've got the benefit allocation of the project and the assist factor, which determines the proportion. And so as a reminder, the benefit allocation, each project, we look at each project and we assign a benefit allocation, and it can range anywhere from 0 to 100%. This is how much of the project is allocated to new growth. And so here we have some example of a project that serves just the existing population only, and the existing population is identified by these gray people here. And basically, if it's only serving the existing population, it's not really eligible for DCCs at all. And then you can shift over to something that partially serves new population and is partially allocated to growth. And in this case, we've got, say, 50-50. And then at the other end, we've got an example of a project that's 100% serving new population only, and that's fully allocated to growth. And that benefit allocation can be based on a wide range of things like traffic flows, sewage flows, growth as it's occurring in the future. You might put in a new intersection controls, and some of those new intersection controls are designed to deal with the existing traffic, and some of the reason for doing it is to deal with new growth. So that's benefit allocation. Then the municipal assist factor is a completely different thing. This is the amount the municipality contributes in addition to the portion that's allocated to existing residents, and the minimum is 1%. You can vary it by program, like the assist for water. It can be different than the assist for transportation, or you can vary it over time, like a higher assist factor in year one of a new bylaw and lower in year two if you're phasing in DCCs like you did the last time you updated your DCCs. The higher municipal assist factor means lower DCCs, but there's more of a burden on existing residents. So basically, as you increase the assist factor, the existing residents are paying more. They're paying. They're basically subsidizing new development by providing assistance, and usually doing that through increases in taxes or say water and sewer rates. Basically, you're providing some assistance or some subsidy for new development. But when you do that, the DCCs can come down. You can't vary it by land use. For example, you couldn't have a higher assist for commercial compared to residential, and this number is entirely at the discretion of council. And we will talk about some options for assist factors as we move along here. So then the basic DCC calculation is you take the DCC recoverable costs and you divide it by the growth. So it's costs divided by growth units equals a DCC rate per unit. And who pays them and when are they collected? They're paid by applicants for subdivision approval or for building permit, and they're collected at the time of subdivision or building permit.
Joel, it's Wayne here.
Yes.
The new legislation, there's new provincial legislation respecting DCC payment where it can be paid over a term of a couple or several years. Is that in effect yet?
Yes. Well, actually, it's always there always has been the opportunity, and it's in your bylaw right now, that you can pay over installment payments. The new legislation is allowing some possibilities for to delay the payment until occupancy if certain bonding is in place. And right now, it's as far as I understood, the last time I checked, it hasn't been kind of fully enacted, but it is proposed to come into effect. I think like January 1st, but then I'm not absolutely sure about that. The last time I checked was a few weeks ago. But yes,
Thanks so much. Thank you.
You are correct. Yeah, you can pay by installments. And then in terms of future updates to the DCCs, there's kind of three types of DCC updates. There's the consumer price index adjustment. You can do that annually, although you can only do it for 4 years after the DCC bylaw is adopted. And then there's a minor update every 2 or 3 years where you're updating the costs. And then there's a major update, which is usually done every 3 to 5 years. And there you're updating the rates and the cost estimates and all of the inputs, and this is the type of update you're doing now, because you have all of this new information from transportation master plans and water plans, and so you've got some great new information and costs that you can use to update. So we're doing a major update now. So that's kind of just a brief overview of DCCs and kind of how they work. I don't know if are there any questions before we move on to some other specific items with respect to the updated structure and secondary suites, and we're getting to the rates, of course. I know that's probably the most
Yeah, I got
important and interesting thing.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I got Councillor Popoff. That's a question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Stop me if this is going to be answered later, but so you're using the example of a 1% rate being charged for a theoretical project. So if we have a $100 million apartment building going up in downtown Cranbrook, we assess a DCC rate at the time of subdivision or development, they pay it or in installments, but we're sitting on this money. And you showed where it can be used for, but is that for the infrastructure to complete that project, or does that go in the bank for future infrastructures related to upgrades of that project or renewal of those infrastructures?
Oh yeah, great question. Yeah, so the DCC money goes into a DCC reserve fund, and that reserve fund is then used for the types of projects that have been identified as DCC projects on the list. So, and we'll come to that in a bit. There's specific projects that are identified as development cost charge projects. Those are the growth related projects. So as that apartment building, the $100 million apartment building is built, it'll add to the population. So that'll provide impacts to, say, transportation impacts, water impacts, sewer impacts, and so it's not for that specific project like on that site. It's more for impacts that are probably a bit more broader and general and downstream. So you might have an intersection with a highway that it's gradually adding the need to improve that, or improvements to the sewage treatment plant. And so that new apartment building will be paying towards the improvements required because it's adding people onto the system, adding demand onto the system.
Excellent.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
And I did want to distinguish that separate from that same $100 million apartment building paying for their infrastructure upgrades immediately around the property. There's two separate, probably more pots, but at least those two separate pots there, right? So they pay for the immediate upgrades. Take the one on Innes Avenue. They pay for those upgrades, or in part. Yep. Plus, the DCCs go into a separate pot for the future growth. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, they're two separate things. And sometimes you'll get members of the development community perhaps say, well, I'm already paying for the roads and the sewer and the water in my subdivision, and now you're making me pay DCCs. Why am I doing that? Well, it's because there's impacts further downstream. We've got to make upgrades to the sewage treatment plant. We've got to improve intersections that are, a little further away from the development. We've got to enhance the water supply to deal with the demand that they've placed on it. So yeah, they're two separate things. Good point. Okay, other questions at this point?
No, we're good to go.
Okay, great. All right, so the updated structure and secondary suite options. In terms of the updated structure, the current DCC growth rate was 0.85%. The proposed update uses a higher growth rate that aligns with the legislative requirements for the interim housing needs report, and it also aligns with water and sewer growth rates. Now, the previous DCCs were calculated based on density, like low density, medium, and high. The proposed update is based on unit counts, which relates to residential subdivisions, small scale infill, townhouses and apartments, and it's more in alignment with the provincial legislation and the revised zoning bylaw, the small scale multi-unit housing infill. So small scale infill, by that we mean things like secondary suites, carriage homes, duplexes, like tearing down a house and building like 2 or 3 or 4 units on that lot, which is now allowed under the new legislation and the zoning bylaw, if it can meet all the setback and requirements and parking requirements and everything like that. So because we're going to see more of that small scale infill, we wanted to make sure that our DCCs were aligned with that. Now, with respect to secondary suites, so the current subdivision charge doesn't include a suite. So basically, when you pay your DCC, you're paying a DCC when the lot is created, and then if somebody comes along, builds a secondary suite, they have to pay another DCC for the suite. So currently, the suites pay a DCC at building permit, except if the value is less than $50,000, because that's a statutory exemption that if you've got a DCC project and the construction value is less than 50,000, you don't pay a DCC. So we've got a few possibilities. You can keep it as it is, that existing approach, or you could have the option for a residential subdivision to include a single attached house and a secondary suite. So when you pay for your lot, there's also a secondary suite is kind of included in the price of what you paid for your DCCs. Now, so that when somebody comes along to build a secondary suite, there's no additional charge. It's already been paid for, basically. And the suite impact is assumed to be pretty much the same as an apartment, and that would incentivize suites because they'd already have been paid for. And it does somewhat align with the new legislation in that suites are permitted on lots. So those are so that's a couple of options. I don't know. I mean, I do have some slides a little further on that sort of shows the impact on the actual rate of including a suite in the DCC or sort of leaving it separate. So we could chat about it like now, or we can talk about it a little later when you've got the actual numbers. I'm not too sure if you've got any thoughts on that immediately, or whether we just wait until we got kind of like the numbers. And there are a couple of other options too with respect to secondary suites. Like you could increase that exemption value. We've got this exemption value of 50,000. You could increase it to say 100,000, which a number of communities are doing, which means that more suites fall under that $100,000 amount, and more would be exempted. So you really got to have sort of like a more significant suite construction. And it used to be, $50,000. You could probably build a secondary suite for less than $50,000. Now I think it's becoming more and more difficult to do it for that amount. So I don't know, any thoughts on that before we move on? Like I said, we will kind of circle back to it a bit.
Yeah, Joel, CO Virtual has a comment here.
Hi, Joel. So just on this, I'm just hoping we can have some conversation. It is committee of the whole to have conversations. So to me, secondary suites are one of those philosophical things that, like with the pool or the arena, kind of what sort of level of incentive do we want for something that we'd like to see in the city? And as you identified, 50,000 is pretty low, but as we get into the numbers, you're going to see that, as people are trying to create secondary suites in Cranbrook, the DCC cost is an inhibitor. And if we want to incentivize DCC or secondary suites, this might be one of those areas where council may want to, find a way that we're not collecting the full value of it if we want to truly incentivize it. And, the raising it to 100,000 is one way, but I just like to make sure we don't just blow by this one. Once you get into the numbers more, you'll see that we're kind of, I don't want to use the wrong term, but we're stifling the opportunity for secondary suites in Cranbrook with the DCCs structured the way they currently are. And it's a really important conversation because you can build housing with the existing housing stock by having more attainable secondary suites within existing housing stock. So let's just not miss this opportunity.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. Certainly, my experience when I was staying in Kelowna last year, I was in an area where every house up there in probably 2 or 3 of the subdivisions up by the college there had secondary suites, and typically there was 1 to 2 people in there, in the secondary suite. What we're seeing at the regional district secondary suites is the parents coming back and living, and so it's really limited the use. And I think too, when we look at the demographics of what used to be how many people per household, I mean, when we were growing up, certainly there was anywhere from 5 to 15 in some families, in a household. But I see that our numbers have dropped over the last couple of years. I went from 2.5 to 1.75 or something last time I looked. But so, yeah, I would say that it's either, it's worth waiving under a certain fee or just waiving altogether for incentive. That's kind of we won't vote today, obviously, committee of the whole, but yeah. Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Mayor. I would certainly support looking at our options in terms of incentivizing secondary suites. And as we've noted, one, to increase the housing supply, but it's also a mortgage helper for people, right? To just help with affordability for their mortgage. So yeah, I'm very interested in looking at our options. And you know, as has been noted, $50,000 does not get you very far. You can fix your deck and maybe do a shed, but I don't think you can do a secondary suite. So yeah, definitely interested in looking at those options.
Further? Nope, I think we're good to go, Joel.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, and we can discuss this a bit more as we move forward here. Okay, so now the project costs and the rates, and this kind of gives you just kind of an idea. There was that question about what are the DCCs paying for. So in terms of capital projects, we've got roads, so we've got intersection improvements, signalization. There's a roundabout in there, creating turning lanes and turning bays. As you get extra traffic, you need these additional turning lanes. There's some additional connections in the road network. So we're kind of extending and connecting some components of the road network. We've got road widening. We're adding some lanes. I'd say the significant increases in costs, which are an increase from the estimates that were done in 2021, are the 6th Street Northwest widening and intersection with Highway 3 and the Victoria Avenue and Highway 3 intersection. So those are some of the significant projects. We do have, this is an interesting change that has occurred in the new legislation, is you can now have projects that are cost shared with the Ministry of Transportation and Transit that can be included in your DCCs. Before you couldn't do that. It had to be like a pure city project. So there's a couple of projects included: the 6th Street Northwest Highway 3 intersection and the Victoria Avenue Highway 3 intersection. And there is a cost sharing guide that it's an agreement, kind of an old agreement that the city of Cranbrook has with the ministry, and we checked, and that can still be applied. So basically, we went through the projects and identified what would the ministry be paying for, what would the city be paying for, and so we've used those. So that's an additional item that has been added to this set of DCCs. And then in terms,
Joel?
yes.
Yeah, sorry, Joel. A question, I guess, for our engineering staff, just for clarity. When we're involved in a new subdivision and we're oversizing and the city pays for the oversizing, that does not come from the DCCs, does it? It comes from our capital program?
That's correct, unless it's a DCC project that we're paying for the oversizing.
Thanks, Curtis. Councillor Papa.
Thank you. So with respect to these two projects, I was aware of the 6th Street and Highway 3, and I think council had some discussion with staff on that, and we decided this wasn't going to be in our term. We're going to kick that one down the road, but I wasn't aware that Victoria and Highway 3 was a piece. So we're going to have some separate time to learn more about what these involves are, what the costs are to the city, what the impact is. I don't think we've heard anything about the Victoria one.
Councillor Popoff, yes, we could staff bring back the report that was done on the Victoria intersection with the highway. It's a significant upgrade to accommodate for turning onto Victoria and Theatre Road.
Yeah, but Curtis, I don't think we heard anything about that. And what we did hear about the 6th Street one was, holy cow, this is going to have a huge impact. Hopefully positive the outcome, but huge impact during, right? So I think I was a little overwhelmed to hear about what that significance was. So if we could hear maybe an update on that, plus the Victoria one at some point, please.
No, for sure.
Good to go, Joel. Thank you.
Yeah, and it is important to consider that, and maybe that's something I should have explained at the beginning, is that with development cost charges, we're thinking about a 20-year time frame. So we're looking 20 years into the future. So these are projects that might not be required for 10 years or longer. But the important thing is to start collecting money for them ahead of time, and then you'll be in a better position when that demand is there. So because a lot of times you're faced with issues, and this comes up with development cost charges, and you conduct, say, another, transportation plan, and identifies that, oh, this project is needed, and yeah, it might have been a good idea to start collecting for this like 10 years ago. So now you have some money, but now you need the project sooner than that. So a lot of these are kind of looking pretty far out into the future. So just that's important context that this is a 20-year time frame we're looking at. Okay, on to other projects. So we've got water projects. We got the water disinfection facility, at least the growth portion of it. There's some major water transmission mains. We're upsizing some water mains. There's some work that has to be done on reservoirs and wells. And I'd say the significant increases in costs from the 2021 estimates were increases, just overall increases in costs for the major projects, and some additional piping projects that have been identified. And then for sewer, we've got some sewer trunk upgrades, some lift station upgrades, and the significant costs are there's some wastewater treatment plant upgrades that are in there that weren't in the previous ones, and some additional trunk lines. And in general, just costs have increased in terms of construction costs. And then we've also got some drainage stormwater projects. We've got some stormwater lines, some connections and upsizing. Basically, there's very few projects, since post-development flows generally need to meet pre-development flows when it comes to development. So there's some limited development impacts, although there are development impacts because of the new development. A lot of stormwater projects are required to deal with existing issues, or, for example, climate change, not new growth. But there are a couple of stormwater projects and one major drainage project added because of the 6th Street Northwest widening as part of that project that you were just talking about. And then parks. The focus is on parks development rather than land acquisition. And basically the parks capital projects are the same as the previous parks DCC projects. There's some neighborhood park and community park improvements in terms of washrooms and playground equipment, landscaping, irrigation, trails, and fencing. Yeah, the parks DCC hasn't changed that much, just the increase due to inflationary amounts. So when you add up all the capital cost estimates, the costs in the existing DCC, you add up the roads, water, sewer, drainage, parks. The existing one was about 70 million, a little over 70 million. The new costs, when you add them all up, is about 182 million. So there's a significant increase in just the pure costs. And also, when you look at those new costs, we've kind of added up the proportion allocated. Remember when I was talking about the benefit allocation, there's a certain amount that's allocated to growth, and there's a certain amount that's allocated to existing. So when we look at that, we see we've got the amount paid by new development is about 91.6 million, and the amount paid by other city sources, which is taxes and rates, is about 91.2 million. So very close to a 50-50 split on the total amounts of the projects, but significant amounts without a question in each of those cases. Now, just a little kind of discussion about investments in infrastructure is that when you undertake good transportation master plans and capital planning, you can be proactive in making infrastructure investments that support new growth. I understand from information provided by the city that investment in upgrades in Victoria Avenue, for example, is helping generate about 300 million in new commercial and residential construction. And there's a list here of a number of projects that are benefiting from that investment in infrastructure. some subsidized Indigenous housing, some BC housing shelter, the Dr. F.W. Green Memorial Home, which is a longer-term care home, Baker Park, which is affordable housing, and also some market housing units and some market senior housing, all all happening because you've made some real investments in that Victoria Avenue upgrade, and which allows these things to proceed. Now, some communities don't make the investments in infrastructure and they can't accommodate growth. We've seen some communities, for example, I heard in Golden, for example, they had some issues with respect to accommodating growth because they didn't have the adequate amounts of infrastructure and investment. And we've seen that happen in other communities as well. So it is an investment in the future, and can result in facilitating and not being an impediment to new growth. So and that's a lens that sometimes people think about when it comes to development cost charges.
Councillor
So
Sesky has a question, Joel.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Good presentation. So in places like Golden, where they don't have DCCs, how do you move forward with growth and infrastructure? Like, what are your options if you're not using DCCs?
They don't.
Well, yeah. In some cases, and I've seen it before, you just say, well, we can't accommodate that growth. In other cases, you could arrange for the development proponent to pay for the infrastructure required to support that growth. And sometimes that can be relatively straightforward. Oh, this is going to have an impact on this sewage lift station or this intersection, so you need to pay for that lift station or that intersection. But sometimes it's much more significant. We've got a treatment plant that's nearing capacity, and it's not something that a single developer can pay for. So then you need to think about other approaches. You might have to say, okay, well, let's get the entire community to pay for this. We'll go to a loan authorization bylaw, borrow the money, and have the entire community pay to help allow development to proceed, which some communities do that as well. They say, okay, well, yeah, that's something we need to do. Or you can look at, then starting to implement development cost charges. And Golden does have DCCs. It's just that they're very, very old and very low. And you can see in some of the comparisons, they have proposed some new DCCs. And so then that kind of brings them more in line with the types of DCCs that other communities are paying. So I guess there's a range of approaches, and with each community, there's unique considerations that they need to think about, and every community needs to make a decision themselves in terms of how they want to approach that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, partially, thanks. So if you're applying for grants as an alternative perhaps, or do any of the grants require you to identify whether you're currently charging DCCs as a contribution towards the future, or do you just ask for the money and hope for the best?
Well, yeah, there are definitely grant programs that want you to show that you're being fiscally responsible and that you're doing your part as a community to collect money for that portion. So, for example, if you're looking for a grant for sewage treatment plant upgrade, and part of the reason for that is to deal with perhaps there's some new regulations that need to improve the quality of the sewage, but another part of it is that you're dealing with some growth. If you can show the granting authority that, hey, we've thought ahead and we're collecting our growth component to help pay for this, then that makes it, I think, a little bit easier. And I know for sure that it's very hard to get grants, for example, a pure growth related project, like something that's only required due to growth, because then the granting authority would say, well, you should have collected some DCCs to pay for this. You should have, anticipated that this would be required. So we're not going to give you a grant to get you out of that situation. But a lot of projects can be a balance, and they're required both for new development and for some existing deficiencies. And if you show you've done your due diligence, or made some forward-thinking investments, then sometimes it's easier to get grants. Yeah.
Councillor Popoff has a.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So on this page you have, you're showing the upgrades to Victoria Avenue, and you list a number of places, including the BC Builds on Baker Park. But I was kind of hoping to see Baker Park, the actual 2-3 acre property, also now qualifies for development. Where are we at with Baker Park for future development as it relates to the infrastructure needs?
I'd need to let staff answer that question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We wouldn't throw you under the bus on that question. Councillor Popoff through the mayor. That's as far as the ability to consider development on that piece of land. Part of these upgrades would allow for that to be accommodated. So that the current DCC project that's moving its way up Victoria Avenue as we speak, going to be finishing this year around the parking lot of Western Financial Place. There's another phase or two that would need to be done in order to get that sewer infrastructure moved through the Baker Park area. But as long as we continue on the same pathway that we are right now with the planned funding and planned infrastructure work, then that would that would be happening within the next 2 years, ideally. So from an infrastructure capacity perspective, it's there. So when it comes to any land use planning or consideration of development, then that would be a conversation to have with council on what its potential wishes would be.
Thank you. I guess my supplement is we're letting a lot of other new developments hook up to this infrastructure. And my take is we've pushed this property back while we're letting the new properties hook up. FW Greenhome, I mean, that was relatively new in terms of it's now on the books, right? So are we are we accommodating all these new ones and kicking Baker Park back until we get the rest of the infrastructure in place? Like it's an observation I'm making.
Councillor Stetsky?
Yeah, thank you. I did have an interested citizen ask me yesterday, once we're done with the current improvements on Victoria, what's coming next in order to accommodate, like how far are we going in the next phases and where might they be?
Councillor Stetsky through the mayor, are we talking specifically about Victoria Avenue and the sewer shed, or?
Yeah, their question was specifically to Victoria Avenue. Like, are we expecting to have the same kind of construction, I guess was really their question, going on in Victoria Avenue next year, but just up a couple of blocks?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's good. So for clarity, the work happening right now on Victoria Avenue is the sewer trunk extension. And that sewer trunk, once it gets to just south of 2nd Street North, it then diverges away from Victoria Avenue as a road and moves in by behind the soccer dome through Balmont Park, along 17th, and then over to Baker Park and along 15th Avenue. So when it comes to impacts to Victoria Avenue from a construction perspective, this project will be no longer in the Victoria Avenue. So even though that sewer project is expected to continue, it won't have the same impacts on that road.
One more from Councillor Popoff.
Well, thank you. So you identified some neighborhood residential areas. Do these neighbors know that the big pipe's coming through there and they're going to be shut down for a period of time? I think that would be more alarming to what of a question.
Council Popoff through the mayor. As soon as we do know that projects are funded in from a budget perspective, we do have a fairly robust plan in place to go out and we drop off notifications. We have a pretty robust communications plan, and that also becomes part of the design work to make sure that we're still maintaining whatever can be deemed reasonable access or minimal impacts to residences. We've been doing this for a long time, and we haven't always done it in the best way. And through those lessons, we really understand how important it is to communicate to the public.
Thanks, Mike. Good to go, Joel.
Okay, so now let's move on to the rates themselves. So these are the current DCC rates, and just as a reminder, a refresher, you can see we've got roads DCCs, we've got stormwater DCCs, we've got water DCCs, sewer DCCs, and parks DCCs, and they're divided into different categories: low density, medium density residential, high density residential, commercial, industrial, and institutional. And one that we kind of use as a bit of a benchmark is this kind of a low density residential cost per parcel or per unit, and it's about 11,500 or so. So then when we look at the new DCC rates, the increase is significant, no doubt. Once again, we've got the roads, the storm, the water, the sewer, and the parks DCCs, and they all add up. And we've got these different categories: residential subdivision, we got small scale infill and townhouses. Once again, the small scale infill being things like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes on individual lots. And then we've also got apartments, commercial, industrial, and institutional. And this, it's important to remember that on this slide, this is when we have secondary suites included in the residential subdivision parcel charge. So in this case, we're saying a secondary suite is included when you pay for a new subdivision. That means that somebody coming along wanting to build a secondary suite wouldn't have to pay anything extra. It'd already be paid for. But as a result, the DCC itself is significantly higher at 37,500 for a new parcel. So that includes both the secondary suite and the increase that has been seen for the to service a single detached home as well. Small scale infill and townhouses would be about 18,900 per unit. Apartments would be about 13,500 per unit, and the commercial would be $162. That's per square meter, not per square foot, per square meter. And industrial about 161, and institutional about 197 per square meter. So in terms of how that compares to your current rates, and once again, this is with the secondary suite included in the residential subdivision parcel charge, we have the residential subdivision going from 11,500 to about 37,500, which is an increase of about 25,000 or 224%. So a very significant increase, no question about it. Small scale infill and townhouses. This isn't an exact comparison, but it is pretty similar to what would have been kind of medium density previously. Goes from about 9,000 to about 18,000, so an increase of about 9,800, so about 100%, a little over 100% increase there. And apartments going from about 6,500 to about 13,500, so a change of about 7,000, 109%. Commercial, less of an increase, like still a significant increase. We've got 11% increase for commercial, 61% for industrial, and 49% for institutional. The reason the change there is a little less dramatic or significant is that we took a look at what are called equivalency factors, basically how you're translating commercial into equivalent units, and made some updates and kind of modernized them based on some additional information. So they don't go up quite as much. And just before we sort of pause to discuss this, if you had a separate charge for a suite, so when the suite comes along, it's not included in the lot, it has to pay for it separately when it is built at sort of building permit stage. Then the residential subdivision, it still goes up, yeah, no question about it, but it goes up kind of more in alignment with the others. We have residential subdivision going from 11,500 to about 24,000, so that's an increase of about 12,500. So about 100%, a little over 100% increase. And the secondary suite would have to pay this 13,500 amount when it comes forward at building permit. So that's the impact if you don't include it in the charge at subdivision. So then there's kind of this question, which we've already kind of talked about a little bit, is whether the parcel should include the secondary suite. So like that increase in the residential subdivision DCC is significantly higher when we include the charge for a suite in the cost of a DCC for a new lot. So you're basically getting, you know, more than one unit. When you're paying for it at subdivision, you're paying for both the home and the suite. So keeping that charge for the suites separate, that reduces it. You say you pay less at subdivision if you say, oh, we're not going to include a suite. When you come forward with a suite, you got to pay an extra DCC, but then the suite would have to pay about 13,500 at building permit if the work is more than 50,000. And as I already mentioned, we've got this option to increase the exemption level to 100,000, or you can actually choose whatever number you want, but 100,000 is what some communities are going. So there's some room for a bit more discussion on how to approach secondary suites when you look at the actual numbers. But of course, also happy to talk about the actual DCCs themselves and the magnitude of the increase. We do have, of course, we recognize that this is a big increase. It's not something to be undertaken lightly, and so we do have some options that you can think about in terms of either phasing those in or increasing the assist factor so it's not quite as big an increase. There's other options, like you can say, well, let's delay some projects or reduce them, but the important thing is this kind of says this is kind of the increase that would be required in order to adequately fund your infrastructure based on your master plans, based on the growth, based on kind of prudent forward-looking finances. So I'll pause now. I'm sure there's some questions about the rates, and we can also talk more about the secondary suites as a separate charge.
I have Councillor Bissett.
Well, thank you. Yes, in looking at the real life impacts of this, I'm thinking it's a good idea not to include the secondary suites automatically in all residential subdivision and to go with the $100,000. It's going to be a shock enough to be increasing the rates, and we don't need to be collecting money for something. And I mean, part of the issue with secondary suites, I think of myself, it's fine if you're having a relative come in, but as soon as you open the door to other people, one of the disincentives is what I've heard as the nightmare of having renters. And that's the reality of it. So not every residential homeowner looks at this as a great thing. It's more as a last resort, and maybe they have families. So I don't think we should just automatically include the cost charge for secondary suites, and we should try to make this as gentle a transition as possible.
Councillor Papa.
Yes, thank you. So just trying to put something in context here. So the current high density, let's take the 71 unit apartment on 4th Street, is paying just under $500,000 in DCCs. If we crank it up to the proposed rate, they're going to be just shy of $1 million in DCCs. I mean, that's a bit of to me, that's a bit of a shock. And I'm just wondering, where did this come from that we're actually, I just need some background. Why are we talking about doubling increases in DCCs, which is what it looks like we're doing? Was that something council gave to staff to direct you to increase DCCs? Why are we seeing 100% increase in what I'm seeing as DCC rates?
I'll speak to that, Joel.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, Councillor Popoff through the mayor. So our council did direct staff to look at an update to the DCC bylaw through the budget process. And through that process, in looking at best practices, looking at all the information, the asset management information that we have, the known infrastructure investments that we need to have, this is simply an output of that analysis. This report is not staff's opinion or staff's direction. Staff do not adopt the DCC fees or bylaws. Staff are also not saying that this is easy or is going to be something that everybody is going to be a fan of one way or the other. And when it comes to just strictly understanding that these are costs of infrastructure improvements that need to happen. We could look at doing it without any DCCs whatsoever, or a complete spectrum of options of funding in between. What staff do strongly recommend is we don't consider going backwards in the proactive infrastructure investments that we have been making, because we knew that that just defers increases in costs, increasing rates of failure, and the inability for new development to occur, and the inability for new housing and affordable housing to be constructed. Staff certainly do recognize that that these significant increases are not something that is going to be easy and does need to be discussed at this table. But the infrastructure costs are what they are, and the funding needs to come from somewhere, and that's why we're here having this discussion.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So if you may, because Councillor Graham isn't here, he asked me to forward a question on this discussion. So his question is, will the 200% increase, I don't know where the 200 is, but the 200% increase to single family subdivisions make housing more affordable? That's Councillor Graham's question.
Councillor Popoff, through Councillor Graham, great question. The simple matter of the fact is that any time that we make a decision that increases fees or increases cost to a project, that project cost will increase. So because I know there's a desire for a yes and no answer to something along these lines. I also do hesitate to consider the term affordability, because an argument could be made that the proactive infrastructure investment that comes out of a DCC program will lead to more affordable housing. And our housing task force has determined that single family residential subdivisions are not necessarily affordable housing.
I got Councillor Stetsky and Councillor Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to support Councillor Blissett. I think we should be starting our discussion on residential increases at 108%, not at 224%.
Thank you. Councillor Ray, then Councillor Peabody.
Thank you, Mayor. When we look at the slides regarding the capital cost estimates, I think that's the key data that we're discussing here today, that, the existing DCC costs are at 70.7 million, whereas the new costs, the data is indicating it's at 182.8 million. So that's the challenge that we're faced with. So how do we meet that challenge? And I would also agree with Councillor Blissett that obviously it's very important that we look at updating our DCCs, but the sticker shock to include the secondary suites just doesn't seem like common sense in the real world, and noting that, yeah, not everybody's going to want a secondary suite. I support the consideration around increasing the exemption level to $100,000. And I would wonder, are there any communities that have increased that to, say, 125 or 150? I'm just wondering, just thinking again about construction costs. Do we have any information about that?
I don't know of any that have gone above 100, but I know that several that have gone to the 100. Perhaps there might be some that I don't know of, but I think 100,000 was kind of like the new upper level that has been identified.
Okay, Councillor Peabody.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm struggling with this significant increase in the DCCs, because we did do a significant increase in 2022, I believe, and that was almost a 400% increase. And now with this, we're almost over 1,000% increase in DCCs since 2022, which is a significant hit to our developers. I guess my question is, most of our major developments that are happening in Cranbrook right now are from developers outside of Cranbrook. So are we looking into, what is Crown Pacific what are they paying in DCCs at some of their other projects around British Columbia, or Broad Street Properties, or what's the other one, West Urban? Like, are we going to be competitive if we do a 108% increase and now they're paying $1 million for, a high density project, if they can pay 500,000 in another community? Like, yes, we got to pay for our infrastructure, but we also got to attract these developers to come to Cranbrook to actually build these projects. And I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot and see us, halt any new projects moving forward because our DCCs are too high.
Certainly. Go ahead.
Well, we do have some comparison numbers in the slides, and I also did actually get some comparisons from a much wider range of communities all throughout BC, which might be useful. But yeah, developers, it probably depends on where they're doing their development. If they're doing development in Lower Mainland or Calgary area, they're probably used to paying pretty significant DCCs. If they're doing it in smaller communities that haven't updated their DCCs in a very long time, and there are those, then maybe they're used to dealing with lower DCCs. I suspect if they're involved in a kind of a spectrum of communities across, they're probably used to seeing a fairly wide range of development cost charges. But if they're involved in the Lower Mainland, they're definitely used to paying higher DCCs, no question about it.
Thank you. Councillor Stetsky.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So just thinking ahead a little bit, I think whatever we decide in the end, the implementation and timing around putting them in place can be important. Like, if we leave a window of time, it could encourage developers to actually get going before the DCC rates go up. May be kind of an incentive for development to move forward that have been sitting, quite frankly, for quite a while in this community.
I've got a couple of comments before we go around again. I agree with Councillor Roussette's comment on the 108% increase and scratching the $13,500 secondary suite proposal. That's more palatable. Just for comparisons, I read an article a couple of weeks ago. The city of Hamilton just reduced their DCs 20%. The average home, for an average home, it was $98,500 a year. They reduced them to $78,800 a year per door. That's the cost of doing business. So I guess there's a couple of things we can look at. If we decide not to move forward, this is just, I think, more than supports growth. This is going to address future failures as well. And this council, if any council should understand that, we should, because you know what? We're the ones that have been faced with some legacy, projects, and not just one or two, several that are multi-million-dollar projects. Guess what? It's no different than this. If we avoid this is reality. These are true costs. This is basic math, not basic mathematics. This is math. Cost of doing business and going forward in Cranbrook. If we choose not to do it, and to eliminate DCCs be absolutely ludicrous, but not to increase when we see, and we just see this in everything we're doing since COVID. That's 2 to 4 times the cost in some of the stuff that we're seeing since COVID. We're no better than the councils before us that kicked the can down the road and left it for somebody else. And you know what? I think, from a responsibility side, I think this council's been extremely responsible. So, maybe incrementally moving it forward to there, whatever. But certainly, you know what? This is something we're faced with, and this is going to be probably one of the hardest decisions this council has to make, especially near the end of a term. Next up is Councillor Bissett.
So I do think Councillor Ray mentioned that maybe we should look at what projects are being included in the DCCs. Because maybe there's something that we have a choice on in that, and that might have an impact on the cost. So could we look at those projects and then with engineering and that see, is there anything we can maybe shave off, or is there savings possibilities there?
Councillor Brissette through the mayor, that is a great question. We have removed quite a few projects from that list because the same point. We need to focus on, not to say it again, but like the need to have projects, not the nice to have. And there were some nice to have ones there that were legacies. And we realized we can't go forward with those because we need to, it is also about risk management. This isn't a highest and best practice of every recommended project that could be attributed to growth. We need to look at really the ones that are core and central that will benefit multiple projects for a really long time. But it's still worth having that exercise. And I think doing that exercise again and having that conversation, that communication, it's either going to reinforce the work that's been done, or it's going to open up opportunities for us to have discussions about what changes could be done.
Just one more comment, I guess, too, is if you look at our tax base, our local tax base, it's residential. And, you know, obviously residential is getting hammered here, but that's our tax base, essentially. And then, you know, some commercial, but we're going to limit our tax base. If we can't build these bigger projects because the infrastructure is not in place, not only are we limiting future councils on the ability to do projects, we're limiting their revenue potential in the future. Just something to think about. Councillor Papa.
Yes, thank you. So did I hear that we're going to see what these DCCs are going to be targeted towards, and then what that type of residential commercial growth might be that we can expect with the current state of DCCs and the current money in those reserves? I guess my point is, are we increasing DCCs without knowing what we're actually able to achieve right now without increasing the DCC rates?
Councillor Popoff through the mayor. Yeah, we certainly, because of those significant increases, we've looked at it very clearly that there's a lot of DCC projects that cannot be funded, that the current DCC reserves levels are low and inadequate due to a lack of historical funding. And we also recognize that even if we wanted to move forward with those DCC projects and hope to have DCC income in the future, the city needs to lay out the funds and borrow for that work and pay for the cost of borrowing. And we don't even have enough funding to contribute to our portion of it. So when we're looking at the assist factors, and essentially a lot of these items are 50% growth funded, 50% city funded, we need to really strongly understand that we need to commit to our funding levels that will do that. But this work is based on the work that was done with the OCP, that growth planning, that infrastructure modeling, to make sure that it is consistent with the land use that council has said we want to see in the community, and the growth that can occur in those areas, especially for a lot of the existing infill undeveloped properties that we're not getting any taxation from because there's a lack of built developments. And a lot of those lack of built developments is because of lack of infrastructure capacity.
Right. So thank you. So, but Mike, with the current projects using the DCCs and, you know, the assist and then what the taxpayer is going to have to borrow on, do we have a 5-year plan of what those projects are going to look like, so we can see what the impact would be to having more increased growth in our community? So without these increases, where are we at now? What does that look like for the infrastructure going in? And how is that going to impact on potential future growth that'll broaden our tax base, get more taxes in, and we can continue to grow and prosper without the increase?
No, I hear what you're saying. Okay, Councillor Popoff through the mayor. We don't have that information pulled together like in a report format here. I think that would be super valuable to see. We do know that there is concerns about continuing to do the DCC projects that are in the current 5-year financial plan that council has approved because of the lack of funding and the significant increase in escalation in prices. The 2022 DCC bylaw that saw significant increases was using, for the most part, maybe some funding estimates that were 2020, 2021. We've seen the cost of our infrastructure work that's doubled in some instances since that time. So, but yes, to try to be brief, we can bring that information forward to show, I guess, to further show why even in the short term, what impacts or what restrictions on current investments could occur if we don't move forward with proactive funding.
Thank you. I think that would be an important metric to add into this discussion. Can I, sure, I know there's other questions, but can we use DC? So we talked about incentivizing where we want growth on Victoria Corridor in the downtown area. There's incentives that we put in for that. Can we also use, and separate from that, can we use DCCs to disincentivize areas where we don't really want growth? Like I'm saying, if we don't want urban sprawl or rural sprawl to occur outside of our core areas that we want growth, can we use DCCs to target certain areas of Cranbrook and say, well, your DCCs are going to be 500% more?
Do you want me to tackle that one?
Yeah, is it legal to target areas for increased DCCs?
There's a process that you can use where you can create sectors, like area-based sectors. So you could create a DCC, say, for the core of Cranbrook, and then you could have a separate DCC for, say, the outer area of Cranbrook. For example, Vernon does that. They have a core DCC and an outer DCC. And but what you need to do is you need to calculate. You're basically calculating DCCs based on area, and you're saying, okay, what projects are needed within the core, and how much development is going to happen in the core, and what does that turn into a DCC, and then what development is going to happen in the outer area, and what projects are required in that outer area, and then you calculate the DCC. You can't really like sort of increase the amount or decrease the amount, to say we want to set it at this amount. It's kind of the result of the calculations, and oftentimes the calculations show that in the outer sprawl areas the cost per unit is somewhat higher than in the core area, but it's usually not a huge increase. Like for example, in Vernon, it's maybe like 27,000 a unit in the outer area and 20,000 in the core area. So it's a slight difference, but not an enormous difference. And it's usually the outcome of the calculations. And sometimes you take a look at it and it actually can work the other way, because in the core there might be significant upgrades. You've got to rip up a lot of streets and put in a lot of improvements that can cost significantly more than building in sort of more greenfield types of areas. So it doesn't always work out that after you do the calculation you have a kind of a core that is low and a outer area that is really a lot higher. The other issue is that and a lot of communities have found this, they like in the early years of DCCs, a lot of communities would have a lot of sub areas, and they'd say, "Oh, let's make each area pay, its share. Some areas are more expensive, some are less expensive. Let's do that." But what happens is you end up with a bunch of small pots of money, because if you had, suppose you had 4 different areas of a community, each of those 4 areas has its separate little reserve fund, and it has to be separate for the roads and separate for the water. So you end up with 4 small pots of roads money that where you don't really have enough to do much, and you can only spend that money in that area. And so therefore, most communities have moved towards having kind of one overall DCC for the entire community, and then you collect more money in that DCC reserve fund, and gives you more flexibility to do the projects where you need to. So there are kind of some pros and cons of that approach.
Good point. Thanks, Joel. We got Councillor Steskey has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if this is even a reasonable question for staff, but do we, I know we had some numbers early on in some of the charts, but do we know, and I guess you can't really do it project by project, which is why I'm not sure this is reasonable. I'm trying to figure out, if we don't increase DCCs, what the balance is going to be that we then have to go to taxpayers to pay. Trying to find that right balance between the developer paying and taxpayers paying.
We actually do have a slide that's sort of that a little later on.
We did look at this specifically because that's part of that conversation and a narrative, Councillor Setsky through the mayor, if we're in alignment that what we agree the infrastructure needs are, then looking at the funding mechanisms, and that is a push and pull. It's not something that we can hide from once we do agree that the projects do need to occur. So yes, I think
that's really an important big picture question. What should the percentage of the developer pay of costs versus general taxpayers as a principle?
Yep, good point. Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Mayor. We've touched on that, like many other communities, we have inherited an infrastructure deficit, and hasn't happened over a few years. That's happened over many years and probably over several decades. In combination with that, of course, we all expect annual cost escalations, but we know we had a huge spike with COVID. So it's a little bit of a perfect storm, the challenge that we're facing. Affordability for developers is an important issue. We definitely want business in our community. We want developers to come. But at the same time, the whole infrastructure system really is an interdependent ecosystem. So if we were a community, let's say we had, the most affordable DCCs ever, but our infrastructure was so far behind that we were not development ready, developers aren't going to come anyways because it's not development ready. So we need to find that sweet spot. So, that's the purpose of our meeting today. And in terms of, I think we were at community comparisons, it might be helpful at a later date to share with council in some format some of the other community comparisons, because we do want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. And several of the communities on the list are more resort communities with a ski hill either in town or nearby. Whereas we're more of a regional service center type of community. We do not have, we're very lucky to have Kimberley Twin Mints up the highway, but it's not part of our immediate community. So it might be worthwhile to come back to council just with some other community comparisons that do not include a resort as part of their immediate economy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, I do have some community comparisons that I can show you in addition to the ones that we've got here. I have them ready to go because it just shows a much broader range if you want to see them.
Yep, we can probably move on to that now then. Yep, good.
Okay.
Good to go, Joel. Yep. CL Virtual has a comment.
Okay, so Joel, and maybe to Mike too, for council, we've had a little discussion now, I guess if we boil this right down to the base, it's the list of projects that makes up the foundation of what we're talking about. So we've got the old list, which is the foundation of the old DCC bylaw. And now we've got an updated list of capital projects, which is the foundation of the new DCC bylaw. And I think there's been some chatter about it, but I'd just like to overtly talk about, as part of this process, if council needs to defend the costs of the DCC bylaw, it's very important that council understands the foundation being that list of projects. So I'd like to make sure that we've overtly added a step here in this process where we bring that capital project list back to council so that council can support the foundation of all of this before we step forward into how do we break it apart to pay for it. So let's just maybe say we're going to do that step.
Thank you, Mark. Good to go, Joel.
Okay. So on to some comparisons then. So in terms of comparisons, one of the things that I kind of wanted to say with respect to comparisons is that it often doesn't make sense to compare DCCs. Often you're comparing apples and oranges, and you've already kind of alluded to that in some of the comparisons that we had in our slides. Each community is unique in terms of the kind of infrastructure needs to support growth. Some are really well positioned to support growth. Some have a huge amount of work to do. You've got different densities. Some communities are really spread out with miles of roads and few utilities to pay for them, and some are far more compact with a lot more growth and fewer lengths of roads or lengths of water and sewer line. Some communities have big, water treatment and sewage treatment issues. Some are focused on parkland acquisition. Some don't do any parkland acquisition. position. Some have drainage DCCs, some don't. So anyways, comparisons, just to say, come with a bit of a warning, take them with a grain of salt. Don't get too caught up in comparisons. It's far more important to focus on the investments you need to make as a community that we've been talking about and how you're going to pay for them, what's right for Cranbrook. With all that being said, everybody wants to see comparisons. So we have some, and I actually brought a few additional ones with me as well. So we did focus on basically communities that have recently updated their DCCs in the last year or so. And there are some proposed DCCs like Golden that are in there. They're updating theirs right now. And there's some communities that we didn't include, although I do have them or some of them in the broader comparison, because they're just, out of date. They've been done years and years ago, like Fernie's are from 2015. I think Elkford's is from like the 80s. And some communities are planning to update their DCCs, like Radium Hot Springs, and I think Sparwood is considering DCCs. And Kimberley, for example, doesn't have DCCs, but developers have to pay individual off-site costs. And then when it comes to broader projects, the whole community has to pay for infrastructure, such as wastewater treatment plant upgrades. So all that being said, we've got a few comparisons here. Sun Peaks, just because they updated theirs just last year. So, and then we've got the Cranbrook. This is with the suite included in the lot at the 37,000-ish. Then we've got Golden at about 33,000. This is for single detached. Revelstoke about 33,000. And by the way, Revelstoke does it by floor area, so it kind of depends on the floor area you pick in terms of the comparison. So this is based on I think a 200 square meter home, which is about 2,150 square feet. So probably a little on the smaller side. If you have a bigger home, it's going to cost more. If you had a 2,600 square foot home, Revelstoke would be more like $39,000. And Invermere just updated theirs just down the road, 24,900. And then Cranbrook with a separate suite where you're not including the suite in would be at about 24,000. And there's your existing rates. Now, I will also show you some additional, because we're at single attached, the comparisons, the broader comparisons, we're just doing that based on kind of like a single attached lot. Because the numbers get kind of crazy when you're looking at kind of a wide range of other communities, all the differences. So this is for, I guess you'd call it medium-sized and local interior communities. You can do all these different, I've got some other groupings as well. And you can see here's Cranbrook proposed with a suite paying separately, and here's Cranbrook proposed with a suite included in a lot. And we've got Lake Country, West Kelowna, Golden, Revelstoke, Vernon, and you can see here's Vernon's outer DCC, 27,900, and then we got Invermere, Penticton, and then the Vernon core, which is 20,000, more like 20,000 instead of 27,000, and then we got Kamloops, and then you got some of these that are kind of really out of date. Salmon Arm, 2007. I wouldn't be surprised. They're updating theirs right now. I wouldn't be surprised if that number doesn't triple and get kind of more in the kind of the West Kelowna, Golden, Revelstoke range, because they're doing an update right now as we speak. Fort St. John, it's kind of older, 2017. Fernie, 2015. Castlegar from 2014. So you can kind of see that the more out of date the DCCs are, the kind of the lower they are, and the ones that are done more recently, like Lake Country just updated theirs in 2025 this year, and they're up at 47,000. So there's one kind of like look at, and we can provide these to you. Then the next one is, well, let's look at these resort communities. You'd mentioned resort communities, and I know Cranbrook's not a resort community. What happens if we do compare it to other resort communities? And you can see that resort communities that have recently updated theirs, Osoyoos, Revelstoke, Golden, they're kind of more in that $30,000 to $35,000 plus range. Sun Peaks a little higher, just updated theirs. Invermere, not quite as high, but still kind of in that $24,000 range, and very similar to what we're talking about with Cranbrook if the suite pays separately at about 24,000. Then you got Penticton, Harrison Hot Springs, Whistler, Ucluelet, Fernie, Radium, and Radium is updating theirs now in Valemount. And once again, you can see when you look at the the age of these things, the older ones that need to be updated are quite a bit lower, but any of the recent ones are definitely kind of more in that higher range. And then we can also compare to larger growing communities, maybe where other developers are doing work, and other developers are conducting projects, and so this might be what they end up paying there. And also, I've when I think about this, I think, oh, you don't really compare Cranbrook to, say, Surrey or Burnaby or Abbotsford. But one question to ask yourself is it cheaper to build like a water line, build a road, build a sewage treatment plant in Cranbrook than it is in, say, Langley? It's probably not much cheaper in Cranbrook than it is. Matter of fact, it might even be a little cheaper in Surrey, where you're closer to supply centers and perhaps have more competition, that type of thing. So, so that to say that this while you might not want to compare Cranbrook to Surrey, the costs of building something in Cranbrook, which you got to build the same things, you got to build water pipes, you got to build sewer lines, is probably not going to be a lot less in Cranbrook. As a matter of fact, it could be more expensive. Anyways, when you look at that comparison, you can see that places like Langley and Coquitlam and Surrey and Burnaby have DCCs that are kind of, much higher, 65, 70, and Langley, which is the highest one I know of in BC, over $100,000, and even Kelowna, with depends on kind of where you are in Kelowna. They've got the South Mission area, and then there's kind of like the main area. South Mission's more like 50,000. Main area is more like 42,000.
Joel, is there any chance we can get you to send the medium-sized and the larger growing community slides to?
Yep, absolutely. I actually already sent them.
Staff, they can forward it to us.
Yep. Yeah,
Thank
so they have them in their hands. I just did it. So yeah, it provides a bit of background context, anyways, in terms of the much broader spectrum of communities, rather than just comparing to the ones that have kind of interior BC just did them in the last year kind of comparison, which is kind of what we got here. Going back, you can also see. Oh, did you have questions on that, or so?
Yeah, Councillor Popoff.
Yes, thank you. Mark. So
Yep.
the ones you show with Langley is the largest. Even during COVID, I met with the mayor of Burnaby, and we're down at UBCM, and even during COVID, he was saying, you know what, developers are still beating us down there to try to get approval for their projects, high density projects or whatever else. So we're not Burnaby, we're not Langley. Developers aren't beating down our doors to come and compete to purchase and rezone a piece of land. So the slide I would like to see is communities our size that are not reliant on tech support or resort destinations. Those communities like ours that are hubs that are not reliant on those, where the developers are not beating down our doors to want to develop in our community. So find me that sweet spot of those communities, and then let's look at what their DCC rates and what their dilapidated infrastructure is and what they need to do. I think that's the piece that I need to see. All these other comparatives, you can go, yeah, but these don't apply to us. So what's that sweet spot for the types of communities like Cranbrook that are not resource subsidized or resort communities where the developers are not beating down the doors to want to develop in your community? Give me that one, and I'd really like to then compare that to us. Thank you.
If I could just comment on that. That's again, apples and oranges, I think, really, because what our staff has brought to us is their estimates on our growth. Specific to Cranbrook, so comparing it to somebody with no growth or something, who is it? What is it? So, and their needs are totally different than ours. They may be a newer community, with newer infrastructure. So, personally, I think that what's in front of us has been calculated at the current trends or whatever our staff is estimating is going to happen, what's required for the city of Cranbrook. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yep. So anyways, have provided this information. Staff can forward that to you as well. And I think like when you're talking about it, as I prefaced it, it is very difficult to get a pure apples to apples comparison because each community is so unique. And one of the things that you think about is, okay, if you wanted to think about, okay, what is the cost of infrastructure that's required compared to the growth that's occurring? And if you're looking for similar communities, then what will happen is that community will have similar DCC rates because you got similar costs and similar growth. And so you end up with places like, say, I don't know, West Kelowna or Vernon, which actually Vernon's a bit out of date, so it's probably got to be up a little on the higher side. So or you know, Lake Country, which has a similar population, but once again, Lake Country has high demand for their growth. But it's not really. I mean, it's about the growth that's going to occur, but it's about the cost to build the infrastructure compared to the growth and dividing those two numbers. So a similar community will have a similar DCC. Is kind of basically my point. Okay, anyway, so we got a few other comparisons like townhouses, and in general, the comparisons are kind of aligned a little bit with single family development, but not always. So once again, we can see with a townhouse, Cranbrook, the proposed, now this doesn't have the include a suite or don't include a suite because that's not an option for townhouses. But so the Cranbrook proposed is kind of, I'd say, kind of in the mid range when you look at the comparison with this small number of communities. Similar with apartment, kind of in the mid range when you look at the comparison with this small number of communities. With commercial, once again, kind of in the mid range when you're looking at the comparison with this small number of communities. And in industrial, kind of in the mid range, maybe a little bit on the higher end with these community comparisons. And institutional, very, very similar in terms of DCCs to Invermere and Revelstoke and what Golden is proposing. So there's some comparisons there. Now, we talked about options. So things to think about in terms of moving forward. So what are the options? There's the assist factor. So you could increase the assist factor. This is a purely policy council decision on the assist factor. How much do you want to subsidize development? You could also phase it in over time. You could have, there's also a technical reconsideration of the benefit allocation, the portion of the project allocated to growth. Probably not a lot of room there, but there is that. And as we've already kind of touched on, defer some projects and accept a reduced level of service. So that's, looking at the project list and thinking that through a bit more. So let's talk about the assist factor. I've already kind of talked about what an assist factor is. It's at council's discretion. The whole community pays it. So if you had a water project that gets a 50% assist, and we're not talking benefit allocation, we're talking assist. This is pure subsidy. Then the community, the taxpayers are paying for 50% of the water costs created by the new development. In other words, taxpayers are providing a 50% subsidy to developers for water projects required by new development. And you can vary the assist by service, which is an interesting thing to think about. You could have a higher assist for roads than for water. So maybe if some DCCs are a little higher than you want to see them, you could have an assist for that type of DCC. But you can't vary the assist by like the area of the community or by the land use. So in terms of phasing in, you could phase in the new rates. You could have a similar approach taken for the last DCC update. You had a year 1 as 40% assist, year 2, 20% assist, year 3 was 1%. And to get a relatively even 3-year transition for this update, it would probably be a 35% assist the first year, a 15% assist the second year, and then a 1% assist in year 3. So that would give you kind of a relatively even 3-year transition. And one thing to bear in mind is in-stream protection is that, so if an applicant has their application in before the new bylaw is adopted, they pay the old rates. So that kind of gives a bit of a one year kind of like phase in in any event. So basically, get your application in before the new rates, before the bylaw is adopted, and then you have a year to get that application permit approved or the subdivision registered within, as long as you get it registered within a year of the new bylaw being adopted, then you can pay the old rates. So you get that kind of that in-stream protection, which is there regardless of what you do with any phase in or anything like that. It's always there. It's in the legislation. Basically, get your application in before the new bylaw, you pay the old rates as long as you get your building permit or subdivision approved before a year. And then this question, which you already brought up, was what about the taxpayer implications? So we thought, okay, what would the assist factor be required to sort of keep these projects, but keep the DCCs, the new DCCs, the same as the old DCCs? So what sort of an assistance would taxpayers be providing to keep the DCC rates from going up? And that's about a 43% assist. So taxpayers would assist by paying 43% of the costs allocated to new development. So this assist, it ends up being different things for different sources of funding, because roads, drainage, and parks, those are paid by property tax. So basically, you'd have to generate an extra $920,000 a year in property taxes in order to provide that assist for the roads, drainage, and parks projects. So that's about a 2.4% increase on all property taxes. So when you're thinking about this kind of balance, it's like, okay, well, that's something to think about. Water and sewer, a bit more of a significant increase, because for the water frontage tax, you'd need to generate another $740,000 per year. And once again, this assumes that you're taking all these costs and smoothing them out over 20 years. That's not actually how the costs come. They kind of come in lumps and bumps as projects come along. But this is kind of like this theoretical smoothing that could be done. And you could probably do that by balancing things out with reserve funds. Anyways, $740,000 a year means a 27.2% increase in water frontage taxes. And with sewer, you've got an extra $340,000 a year, which you need to generate to keep those DCCs low, which is equivalent to a 15.8% increase in sewer frontage taxes. So those are the impacts that the existing residents, your existing taxpayers, would have to pay in order to subsidize or reduce the DCCs that developers who are doing kind of new subdivisions or building new buildings are undertaking. So I don't know if we want to pause for a moment to chat about that in this.
Yeah, I think,
It's
Joe,
kind of like
we'll pause just a minute so council can catch their breath, because those numbers, they say a lot for sure. Council, anybody a comment or question? Councilor Papa.
Sorry, I'm doing too much talking, but by broadening our tax base, by bringing on high density apartments, by bringing on expansion of new businesses, let's take Broad Street down on Innis, Runners, and Toyota. I understand it was around $800,000 in tax. So that's broadening our tax base by 3%. And they did it at the old DCC rate. We're talking now about all these increases, and those were probably before 2022. Would that still be the case? So if we broaden our tax base, it's another metric by keeping costs low about what they can afford to buy and build, and then charge back to their customer, which is a renter or the business. That's another metric that I think we need to be cognizant of. Continue to broaden your tax base is another way of saying we're going to make it easier for all the existing taxpayers to pay whatever the costs are for our needs for upgrading our infrastructure. So it's not just DCCs. If we can broaden our tax base, that's another huge way of making it affordable for all of our new and existing taxpayers.
Yeah, I think, when you look at, taxes are our main source of revenue. So if you look, all of our operational costs have to come from revenue. So, if you look at our operational costs and, even if we froze them at 2.5%, we know that's higher than that, with wages and whatnot. we're not even close, you know, with, say that Broad Street or something. So that's gotta come in as new capital, right? New revenue, just to offset that. And then we also have reserves that we're supposed to replenish, and that some of those reserves are that funding is coming out of tax dollars as well. So, you know, yeah, it's just not quite that simple. Yeah. Councillor Ray? Yeah, then Councillor Bissett? Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I think this gets down to, we want to be mindful that we're balancing the needs of all of our stakeholders. So for sure, you know, we've talked a fair bit this morning about developers, and they're a very important part of our community. And I know developer feedback is going to be part of this process. So I really look forward to that. But at the same time, we have to be mindful about how much of a burden we want to shift over to our other taxpayers. And, you know, for me, and we will get this feedback from the development community, what will the market bear for developers in terms of costs to build a single family house? And, you know, when we look at those comparisons, even if we're looking at our new proposed without the secondary suite, it looks to me that we're in a zone of affordability, certainly compared to other areas of the province. So, but I think the key thing, as CAO Fercho touched on, is going to be for us to review the DCC project list. And I think staff's approach, and we will see that when we do that review. Hey, if we had a magic wand and we could update everything, we would, but we don't have that magic wand. So we just have to be so strategic and very surgical in our approach. And I think that's what we're seeing in projects like the one on Victoria Avenue. It's very strategic, and that is what we're going to have to continue to do. So anyways, I look forward to this process. It's going to continue to move forward. The developer feedback will be key, and we just do need to balance the needs of all of our stakeholders.
Great comments, Councillor Bissett.
So, and maybe you could comment on this, is development does not pay for itself. And that is a fundamental principle that we need to understand. So when we're saying development is good, we have to realize that it's a cost. It is not a net gain in money. And that needs to be understood by councils. We face that, like, that is I believe that to be true. And maybe, as I say, others can comment on this, but we are looking at costs for development. So the idea that, oh my gosh, it's always good to see development in a town. Well, maybe not. Yes, we need it because we know we need accommodation for people. We want our downtown to thrive. We want certain things, but it's a cost, and some development costs even more. When we're looking at the shadow mountains of this world, that has been a gigantic cost. Some development is more cost efficient in that it's infill and it brings other benefits to us. But on the whole, we're not gaining in taxes. We're gaining in costs. Now, maybe some of the professionals here could comment on that, if I'm off the base or not, because that's the philosophical difference here. And we need to be aware of the reality of that.
Councillor Popoff,
Well, thank you.
comment on that. Yeah.
So to that.
CO
Yeah.
Fercho first, yeah.
Just on that, so Councillor Bissett through the mayor, what you've touched on is something that's sort of, it's part of this conversation, it's part of another conversation as well. So in terms of the assist factor for DCCs, that's just one small portion. Like if we step away from the DCC conversation for a second, what you were touching on is something more around the asset management conversation. So there's a term and a philosophy that's kind of gotten to be mainstream over the last number of years. Is a development net tax a burden or a net tax increase? And so what you've touched on is, if you look at the overall cost of plowing the road, repaving the road, replacing the pipes, for a dense development, use the term in the core, the amount of money that's collected in taxes pays for that infrastructure and the maintenance of that infrastructure. As you get more sprawl, there's more meters of road, more meters of pipe, and that single home doesn't pay enough taxes to cover all of that asphalt, all that plowing, the replacement of the pipes. So it becomes net tax negative over time when you apply the asset management lens. So there's this other conversation about asset management and tax revenue to cover the costs of those assets that you've talked about. This one is more on the DCC side, and that sort of the joint contribution towards the dam, the wastewater treatment plant. And so that they're related, but they're two separate conversations. So yeah, you're right there.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Papa.
And thank you. And I think that was a little broad in your comment, Councillor Lissette. I mean, let's take Broad Street Runners and Toyota. How is those going to cost the taxpayer rather than them being an asset to providing taxes for 3 infill properties that are not a burden, they're not a negative in what CEO Furcher was talking about. Those are 3 examples, are going to be a huge contribution to our tax base today and in the future. They're infill properties. Absolutely. If we look at that rural area between Wildstone and Shadow Mountain, that's going to be a huge negative in terms of the kind of sprawl development that's going to occur out there. But if you look at the Victoria Corridor infill, and if you look at downtown Cranbrook infill and high densification, and not the asset management burden that Councillor or CEO Furcher was talking about, those are assets to our community. So I would say balance that out. What is a true asset to our community for what types of development that we need and want, so including housing and growth, versus some of these specific types of development that are going to be a negative to our community. And let's target what those are and not encourage those to happen. But there's a lot of great development we can do in our community that I don't think is going to be a negative to growth, development, and burden the taxpayer going forward. And I think those are the ones we need to really seriously look at, and how do we make those happen? And then you throw in the DCC costs on top of those that where we want development to occur, and we got to find, as in Councillor Ray's term, the sweet spot to make that happen.
Councillor Peabody, then Councillor Teske.
Thank you, Mayor. Joel, my apologies if I miss this, but these numbers that you're showing here, if the DCC rates stay the same, is that considering that, like, is that worked on an average of our development investment over the last 5 years, or is that with our current numbers?
That's just based on your current tax rates right now and your current water frontage taxes and sewer frontage taxes, the assessment that you have in place right now. Yeah, and yes, you could also do a much more complex analysis where you're trying to sort of take a look at the impact of a new sort of assessed value, new water frontage, new sewer frontages. But this is a fairly straightforward analysis. What happens if we, this year have to generate $920,000 of more money, and this year we have to generate $740,000 a year of more money. But in general, as growth occurs, you have more costs. That's often what happens. So this is basically what we're thinking about here in terms of this. This is a relatively simple analysis, saying this is what the impact would be, because you'd probably have to start doing that right away. You'd probably have to start, this would start, if you're assisting, you got to start assisting as soon as you adopt this thing.
So I guess a budget question would be, can we create a budget projecting what our DCC investment is going to be over the next 5 years? And with that, the variable is, if we increase our DCCs, do we know if investment is going to stay the same? Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Where do we play the safety measure here? So if we're increasing DCCs by 108%, let's say, do we just factor in that our investment with DCCs is going to stay the same or increase for the next 5 years?
In part, is that not what we're doing in our capital? This is all about our capital projects too. When we are looking at extending our capital budget forecasting from 5 years to 10 years. And actually, some of what we're looking going 15 to 20 years down the road. So I think that aligns with what you're saying there. But certainly now, we are looking 10 years, aren't we, Mike? We're looking 10 years in now. And
Yeah, Mayor Price and Councillor Peabody, that is correct. I think one of the challenges with something like this is there's a lot of economic factors that are outside of our direct control or that we're subject to. And that has been one of the challenges, is that when we've talked about this, even through the revitalization tax exemption programs, a lot of our economic development and related initiatives, it's not something that that many communities of our size would have a lot of good data to project what's going to happen with the economy. Especially this council has done a lot of projects, and we've seen a lot of approvals happen for rezoning that just haven't gone anywhere. And those were done when the DCC fees were much lower, even prior to the 2022 update. More recently, we're seeing a lot of economic development, and that's when the cost of doing work has increased relatively. So it's absolutely, it needs to be a consideration. Those factors are something that's difficult for us to really quantify and qualify to say, is there a sweet spot where if we increase it more than this, people are going to walk away? Where we're anecdotally, through the communications that we've had and some of the other studies that we've done, when we even looked at the fee increases for building permit and building inspections, and then we also talked about the downtown revitalization tax exemptions. Even when we're looking at these DCC fees, anecdotally, we're hearing that for those larger, higher density projects, that's not as much of a concern for them to just say whether they're going to go forward with the project in Cranbrook, compared to all the external market factors that are much more of an influence or a concern for them.
Yeah, because I think my fear, and maybe it's just with the council, I guess it depends on what our overall confidence is in how attractive it is to invest here. But if we increase our DCCs and investment goes down, now we're having to do an even larger increase to property taxes than what we're experiencing right now.
I'm wondering, looking at the time here, I know there's a couple of people that have some other plans today that are going to probably afternoon. Joel, do you think we should move on to the next presentation, or just quickly jump over these last two slides? And they're pretty straightforward, I think, these next couple here, but thoughts?
Yeah, I can move through these last slides. Yeah, I'm aware of the time as well. We're aiming for a couple of hours for this one and an hour for the subdivision servicing bylaw one. So okay, I'll aim for that if that's. I mean, we've got some great discussion, some direction and thoughts that we can take forward. There are a couple of other things that might need a bit of discussion, but benefit allocations, probably not so much that we need a lot of discussion on that. That's something we can take back, and it's more of a technical number based on population, water flows, sewage flows. But for some projects, there's some room for interpretation. One thing that I did want to touch on was, and this is, you're talking about, are there some things that we can include or not include? And one of the things is that the new rates, the water DCCs end up going up a fair bit because we've included interest costs. And interest costs weren't included in the previous DCCs. Interest costs are allowed if you're borrowing money, or if you are fairly sure you're going to need to borrow money. So the water disinfection facility with a $3.5 million loan authorization, that would qualify as you'd be able to increase or include the interest costs into the DCCs. And so what we did was we included the interest costs for the water disinfection facility and the transmission main to reservoir number 1. And when you look at the interest costs, I mean, this probably isn't entirely surprising to some people who deal with longer term financing, but it costs as much for the interest as it costs for the project, or the amount that you're borrowing. So over a 20-year financing period, the disinfection facility interest is $3.4 million. That's the interest amount on the $3.5 million loan. And for the transmission lane, it's $8.5 million on borrowing $8.9 million. So we've added that interest cost. So the interest cost basically, doubles the amount that we've got in terms of it, for the amount that you're borrowing. So there is a council consideration. And maybe we do this when we're going through the entire list. But, basically a question is, should we add in the interest costs? And if you're looking for a place to reduce, that is an area you can say, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't include the interest costs, even though you can. Although one thing about interest costs is it's only in very limited situations, and you have to get approval of the ministry, and you need to have a council resolution that says that we're going to do this. So there's a couple of little hurdles that you have to cover to include interest costs. So I don't know if we want to stop and chat about that, or do we talk about that at some future date? I await your direction.
I think we can move on with that, and we'll have we're starting our budget talks here very shortly, and that'll probably come up during our budget discussions.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, I'll also just quickly go over some exemptions. There are exemptions. I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but there are certain things that are exempt, like buildings for public worship, places where DCCs have previously been in charge. We've already kind of touched about this building permit exemption. You can also increase the size of the a small unit, like a micro suite under 29 square meters, which is like 300 square feet, is exempt. And there's a few other sort of details. There's DCC waivers and reductions. You can have waivers and reductions for not-for-profit affordable housing, for-profit rental housing, development designed to reduce environmental impact, and subdivision of small lots designated or designed to result in low greenhouse gas emissions. And you can do that by a separate bylaw that doesn't require inspector approval. So, but the one thing to keep in mind is if you do an exemption, or a waiver, it has to be funded through non-DCC dollars. So one of the things that we've talked about to other communities, and actually when we did our last update, you did give us direction that you consider exemptions kind of on a case-by-case basis. And indeed, a more transparent approach is sometimes, if you want to provide an exemption, rather than doing a DCC exemption, just provide a grant to that organization, because you're doing the exact same thing. You're essentially, you got to take money and you got to put it in your DCC reserve fund to make up the exemption. You might as well just give them the money, and then they can pay the DCCs. So there's a bit of an overview there. And then in terms of the project timeline, we were aiming to get the revised DCCs to the October 27th committee of the whole, if that's available, if there's time. If there isn't, we might have to find another time slot. Then community engagement in November, early December, and return to council with the engagement results in January. And then final report, bylaw, and readings in February, March. Then you get about 2 or 3 months for ministry approval and potential final adoption, say in June. And we are aware that next year is an election year, and be good to get them adopted prior to the election. I'd say, basically once it's off to the ministry, you've given it 3 readings, you've made your kind of decision on it. Then it comes back from the ministry. It's just, you just have one more little step that you have to do, but you do have to have a council meeting where you adopt it. Anyways, further iterations might push the project into election time, but I'm sure you're keenly aware of that. So those are the project timelines, and that's it for that presentation.
Thank you very much, Joel, and very detailed discussions here. I think everybody sitting at this table certainly got a lot out of it, and I think we got our eyes opened a little bit of the realities that we're facing here. So thank you. Do we want to have a quick stretch? Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay,
Okay.
5-minute break, and then we'll start with the next presentation. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we better start moving on this, I guess, now. So we're up to the subdivision and development services or servicing bylaw update. Joel, is that you doing that one, or Helene?
Yes, I'll be doing the presentation. Ellen has done a lot of the work on it, and she'll be providing able to answer questions and anything like that. And we'll also be taking notes and listening carefully as we kind of move forward with this this project.
Perfect. Okay, you're good to go. The floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to share my screen again here. Okay, there we go. That should be working like it worked last time. Yep, right on. Okay, yeah. So subdivision and development servicing bylaw update. We're working on that, and we have a few items that we want to confirm with you, and we have some items, some areas where we're actually looking at specific questions. So we'll just kind of move through the presentation here. So as a bit of background, the subdivision and development servicing bylaw, it does a number of things. It serves as this regulatory framework for designing and installing infrastructure in new subdivisions. So this is where we're talking about in the actual development itself. The developer needs to build roads, water and sewer systems. This is the bylaw that says this is what needs to be built. It ensures compliance with municipal standards and legislative requirements. It protects the public interest, makes sure that developments are sustainable, they're properly serviced, they're safe, and it also establishes clear responsibility. This is what the developers are supposed to do. This is what the municipality, what the city needs to do with respect to infrastructure provision and maintenance. And in terms of why it's being updated, it implements the official community plan direction. So you got a recent official community plan direction. It's got direction on infrastructure, servicing, and housing. It aligns with the master municipal construction documents, which are some standardized specifications from across BC. So that improves the quality of development, aligning that with these standards. And it reflects current updated legislation. So there's been some new legislation, including Bill 16, which provides some additional powers and creates some additional roles and responsibilities. So anyways, it's we're aligning this update with these things: the official community plan, master municipal construction documents, and current legislation. And basically the overall bylaw is being updated to streamline the development application process, clarify the process, integrate it with your new updated software. There's some software called PSD Citywide that we're integrating with. And we clarify developer responsibilities and municipal obligations. And we're also wanting to address some current development conditions and trends. And this is probably where we're focusing a bit more on this presentation, is the trend towards subdividing and developing smaller residential lots without lanes, having small scale multi-unit legislation, which allows smaller lots and higher residential density, things like duplexes, tearing down a house, building like 2, 3, 4 units on that lot, or having a house with an accessory dwelling unit or a carriage home in the back and a secondary suite. Anyways, you've got all these kind of trends and challenges, and there's some servicing challenges associated with these smaller lots without lanes, for example. So let's get right into some of the challenges themselves. We've got some challenges with small residential lots. This is an overview of the Pinnacle Crescent subdivision, and you can see this just shows the various layers of various lines. We've got water lines and sewer lines and telecommunications lines and power, and you can see how when you have smaller lots and sort of tighter development, there's a lot going on in the street, and you get these overlapping and conflicting services of water lines and sewer lines and power, gas, telecommunications, and utility boxes. Accessing and parking issues can arise because you get these smaller, narrow lots. So a lot of times you're paving the whole front of the lot as well, and basically all of these sort of intensify as the frontage narrows because you got more utilities, more services in a kind of a tighter, smaller area. So we're kind of learning from that development. So we want to focus on addressing some of this because, well, The OCP direction supports complete communities and great places to live and affordable housing and sustainable servicing infrastructure. And one of our thoughts is to build off of what already exists. Small lots already exist that work well for servicing in areas such as Baker Hill, which has lanes in it. And the provincial legislation also, we want to respond to this legislation that encourages higher density housing on smaller lots. So like the official community plan direction, it talks about things like promoting complete communities and sustainable infrastructure management practices, and has some detail there, supporting the provision of affordable and attainable housing option for residents. And this servicing is kind of interrelated with actually providing these different forms of housing that can provide infill. The OCP direction and policies talks about there's an infill residential land designation, which allows for low density residential and allows for increasing those densities with duplexes and townhouses and threeplex, fourplex developments that are really compatible with the existing single detached homes. And smaller lots are encouraged in the OCP. And then there's some general residential policies promoting efficient use of existing infrastructure and the land base by promoting infill and new development, and developing specific landscaping standards for residential development. And then infill residential designation policies, consider subdivision as a form of infill housing in existing low density neighborhoods to accommodate smaller lots. So it's all kind of pointing towards these smaller lots, more units, somewhat more density. Now, looking at these small lots, the benefit of this is you could reduce some of these utility conflicts and improve the servicing efficiency with these narrow lots. We could enhance the space for landscaping, parking, and storage for these complete and livable communities, and can also support more sustainable and affordable development of small lot housing and small units, and can align that with best practices. So when the rubber hits the road, what we're really talking about is lanes, sidewalks, boulevards, parking, and street trees. Those are the key focus areas. So when we think about lanes can separate services for easier maintenance, replacement, and construction. Like, for example, you could put water lines in the lanes and sewer lines in the roads. So then you've got those two that are not creating as much conflict, and you can think about other utilities as well. What are you going to put in the lanes? What are you going to put in the roads? The lanes also provide secondary access for laneway homes and carriage homes and secondary suites. You can get some parking back there. You can maybe have some shorter front yard setbacks because you don't need that front yard setback to allow for the parking in the front, which makes for perhaps better use of the parcel itself. And lanes really work well for small lots with higher density. So yeah, and actually we've got some examples here. I think this is from the Baker Hill area, just a shot of an area where you've got homes and a lane going through, and this is a shot of an area in the 21st Avenue South area. I think it's near the Kootenai Orchards Elementary School. There's no lanes, so you can just see a little bit of the difference between lanes versus no lanes. You can probably picture it as well, because you have lanes in parts of your community, but those lanes definitely provide some options and some opportunities, particularly with respect to servicing and these additional densities that we're looking at in terms of access to those units with the lane. So in terms of lanes, that's one thing to think about, and we'll come back to these and ask a bit more about them. Sidewalks also are great to have. They enhance community connectivity, improve pedestrian safety. Sidewalks on both sides is what we're thinking in urban and higher density areas, because you've got higher density, smaller lots, more people, more units, duplexes, triplexes, multiplexes, means you've got more people that need to walk on sidewalks. The capital cost increase with sidewalks, but you've got denser development that makes better use of infrastructure and increase the tax base to support some of those longer term costs. And it also aligns with the OCP direction for complete and walkable communities. So sidewalks help enhance that walkableness. And here we just got some examples of some streets, some kind of like older, more developed areas with a sidewalk and a boulevard and sidewalks both sides. And here's a subdivision with sidewalk just on one side. I think that's 17th Street South area there. And boulevards is another thing. So boulevards can create a more aesthetic community field. And by boulevard, we're talking about this kind of space between the road and a sidewalk, or between the road and the actual property line, where you've got an area that can have you can have street trees planted there, or you can also provide some room for services and utilities. It does create some area for snow storage as well. It can help reduce the front yard setbacks by having the laneway access. Oftentimes you have boulevards associated with lanes because you've got this boulevard area that you don't have to worry about cars driving back and forth to access their parking. They can park in the back, making access by the lane. You can also have landscape boulevards in certain areas, like in higher density, community-focused neighborhoods. Larger parcels might not require boulevards because you've got the larger parcels. And in the bylaw, you can have these level of service tables where you define where boulevards are required. So you could say boulevards are in urban areas with small lots, no boulevards in areas with larger lots or rural areas. Here's just a image of a rural area type of subdivision, and here's Baker Hill, where you've got the boulevards and make good use of those. Street trees is another topic. They can enhance the community feel, pedestrian comfort, provide shade, and improve the neighborhood aesthetics. They also provide ecosystem services like helping dealing with stormwater runoff and improving air quality. And trees could be located on public land, like on a boulevard itself, like we've got some street trees here along this little boulevard there, or they could just be encouraged on private land as well, on individual properties, which is where some of these trees are on this side of the road. Now, the current approach, as I understand it, is that street trees exist along the downtown thoroughfares and areas where the city wants to invest in street tree maintenance, like parks. Some considerations for street trees is, the planting and maintenance budget and the long-term tree maintenance. If you encourage more street trees, you've probably got to set aside some additional budget to maintain those trees and look after them. If there's sort of issues, pruning and tree maintenance, those types of things. So that's a consideration for council. Do you require trees on public land? So a new subdivision gets put in, you say, oh yes, we want you to provide some street trees in the boulevards versus just encouraging it on private land. And you can do those through a number of other ways as well. Or you could just identify some key areas for street trees on public land. So as we're going through this update, there were some questions that we wanted to bring, or some wanted to get your thoughts with lanes. We're thinking lanes are a really good idea, and really want to encourage them and require them in the subdivision servicing bylaw, particularly for smaller lots. Medium and smaller lots in kind of more urban settings, not lanes for larger lots or rural areas. So we're wondering about council's thoughts on those, and we'll also be asking about your thoughts on sidewalks, boulevards, and street trees. Street trees we're kind of don't have any specific direction. We're really seeking direction. The other ones, lanes, sidewalks, and boulevards, we're aiming in the direction of requiring those, but we're just wanting to make sure that you're providing your thoughts as well as we're moving on that journey. So why don't I turn it over to yourselves for thoughts? Maybe we start with lanes and get council thoughts on requiring lanes in new subdivision. Now, to keep this in mind, this isn't going in and rebuilding anything that exists. This is about like a new subdivision, and so you're laying out a new subdivision. You're going to require that subdivision to put in lanes, versus right now most new subdivisions don't have lanes.
Thank you. Council, Councilor Tetsky.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. So some of the most pleasant communities, I think, are ones where there is lane access, but in front of the houses, there between the two streets, they're just boulevard park areas where you enjoy sitting out on your deck on the front porch and enjoying the neighborhood as such. And apparently it builds better communities as well. So has there been any thought put into doing that? So no front street, lanes in behind for access, and the two streets facing each other just have kind of a boulevard or park screen space between them.
I'm not sure if I quite fully understand. Do you mean there'd be like no street on the front, or just
Yeah,
lanes?
some of the
or-
older subdivisions, going back a while, there were basically the streets facing each other. There's no street in front. There's just lanes in behind each of those two streets that provide all of the access. And the front is just kind of a communal boulevard park area, quite pleasant. See
Yeah,
those
that's-
in some communities.
Right. Interesting thought. That's not what we're thinking. We're thinking more like the Baker Hill area where you've got, you got streets, but you also got a lane in the back. But you've got a boulevard in the front. The boulevard is, can be of varying widths, which we can think about, and may or may not have trees required in them. But that type of feel, the kind of the Baker Hill feel. And interestingly, when we're doing this subdivision servicing bylaw, we're thinking, wow, you know what? The older subdivisions probably got it better than the newer ones in terms of thinking through how a subdivision should be laid out, and you've already got some great examples in Cranbrook. So why don't we think about kind of going back to that type of approach where we have boulevards and lanes like the Baker Hill area. So that's mainly what we're thinking about there.
Yep. Councillor, we'll go around the table. Councillor Peabody.
Thank you, Mayor. So Joel, would the concept of lanes, would that be like decreasing the setback required for backyards? Like for smaller communities, like decrease the setback, but then have a lane go through? So residents would have a smaller backyard, but have lane access?
Yeah, well, there's some interaction with the zoning bylaw, and one of the things as part of this process would be to provide some recommendations for the zoning bylaw. The subdivision bylaw doesn't regulate the setbacks, but for sure there's some interrelationships there, and that we can reduce the setbacks if we've got lanes. So then it provides a bit more flexibility, because a lot of times, so for example, the front setback in a lot of communities is to deal with parking a car in front of your house and not having it stick out into the road right away. And so oftentimes you need, like, say, a 6-meter front setback, versus if you have it in the lanes, you got more flexibility in terms of parking configurations, and you can also have a garage that kind of gets closer to the lane, for example, and so you can make some adjustments to both the front and the rear setback. Although we're thinking mainly about the front setback, that you can kind of reduce that because you're not having to ensure that there's room in a zone where you've got a lane. You don't need as much room in the front, which it just gets taken up with like paving and parking. You can allow that to come a little more forward. So that's what we're thinking.
Okay, and then the benefit for the city is that we can separate our utilities, so have water and sewer separated, which creates less of a maintenance costs in the future?
Councillor Peabody through the mayor. That's correct. It's the idea is with the smaller lots, it's very difficult to subdivide without causing conflicts where the water and sewer are on top of each other or electrical. It's very difficult and costly to service them. Compared when we've got the very big lots like Mount Royal, it's very easy to service both in the front, but these other ones, it's been very difficult for Public Works to get into around Orchard Heights, things like that, where they have to replace a water shut off, and then there's all these shallow utilities. But we're now looking at even smaller lots than that, given the new provincial legislation. That's why we wanted to bring back doing lanes so we could, move utilities into the lane and the frontage road. Kind of what has been done in the past in Cranbrook, and use that as a model.
And I guess one last question, if I may, is there any like argument against having lanes? Like are developers opposed to putting them in? Like, is it just cheaper to dig one ditch and put sewer and water into one ditch as opposed to two, or what's the downside of lanes?
Joel mentioned one there earlier, is that there is more operation and maintenance costs. However, with smaller lots, we do get more tax dollars to come in and help offset that. There is more infrastructure to be built, which there may be some more cost to the developer because there's more surface area that they'd have to either pave or gravel compared to before. But when they install water and sewer, it's two separate ditches now anyway, so that's not a big issue. It's really, there's more land that's also going to be needed for the subdivision, because now where you've got your 20-meter road, your lot, and then where the lots used to back into each other, you're going to have a 6-meter lane that would have been incorporated as more lots, which would now be a lane.
Yeah, I'd say that the development community might have some thoughts on that for sure, in terms of some perhaps a bit more cost, and as mentioned, that it does take up a bit more of the development land to put those lanes in. But we haven't had a discussion with the development community specifically about lanes yet.
Okay, so just a follow-up question to the last comment. So like you're saying, we need a bigger footprint to put the lane in, but couldn't we decrease our setbacks so we can put the same amount of units in the same amount of space, but have a smaller backyard to incorporate the lane?
Yeah, and that might be some of the benefits that, like from a development community's perspective, is that yes, you have lanes, but look, you're going to be able to fit more units and more sort of development on that lot. So it's a bit of a balance.
Councillor Passat.
So I live in an area with lanes, and everybody still parks on the road. And there's some old vehicles in the lanes that are left there. But some people, I mean, there is some, of course, there is use of the lanes, but they're not plowed as much in the wintertime, so that's a bit of an issue. We saw the issue around the green home. People didn't even, they think they own the place, the parking in front of their house. They don't even acknowledge that they have parking behind their house. So there's a bit of a mindset change that we need to also incorporate with it. It does give you the extra space between you and the neighbors behind you, which is a benefit. But I think this is a pretty small concern, truly, for us. Like, there's not very many neighborhoods this is going to apply to within town. So, you know, I think as these things come up, I think it's a valid way to go ahead. But I'm not sure how much time we should spend on it, truly.
Yep. Councillor Ray.
Thank you. I don't have any objections to the consideration around lanes. And just to save a bit of time, I'm just going to share my couple of feedback items regarding sidewalks and trees. So for sidewalks, I recall a conversation at this table at some point over the last couple of years with the suggestion, I think it must have been around budget time, that we, moving forward, could look at having sidewalks on only one side of the street. So although I can see that it's a nice to have sidewalks on both sides, I was very persuaded in that discussion that moving forward, we should only have sidewalks on one side of the street as a simple asset management, money saving endeavor. So although philosophically it might be nice to have sidewalks on two sides, unless somebody can give me a compelling reason otherwise, I think we should move forward with only on one side. If there's lots of people in the neighborhood, they're all using the sidewalk, they'll have good chances to chat and interact. In terms of street trees, my only feedback on that is I understand there's some funding through FCM around trees, and just want to be sure we're looking at that as a potential resource. I do think greening our communities through trees in terms of cooling and air quality and just quality of life is important. So I'm sure staff are very aware of that FCM funding through about trees, but I just want to make sure we're having a good look at that to see if we can access that and provide some benefit to our community.
Thank you. Councillor Papa.
Yes, thank you. So this whole discussion is about small lots, small residential lots? And what do we mean by a small residential lot?
Yeah, okay. A small residential lot, that is a good question. We have been sort of like wrestling with where that threshold is. But in general, we're talking about kind of like an urban type of residential lot, something that you see in kind of like the urban area of uh, of the community, not sort of like a larger rural type of lot. So in terms of lot size, you're probably talking frontages that are kind of less than say 15, 16, 20 meters, which is whatever, 50, 60 feet sort of thing. And parcel sizes, you're probably talking about, smaller than say 800 square meters, 7,800 square feet. So basically just imagine almost like most of the kind of urban residential lots in Cranbrook. And
Right. So thank you. So going forward, we're talking about a significant part of our new development, not just a small piece over in the corner. So the significant part of our urban development, single detached housing, it's going to fall into this category. So it's something I think worth talking about. Thank you for that. So, and as you were describing and showing the photos of the boulevards and the parking and the sidewalks and everything, I was thinking of back in the utopian days of everyone, cars were hidden, they didn't go down the main road, children were playing on the street and everything else. I don't know if that's our world nowadays. It's a great visual, but I think those are bygone days going forward. I value the use of a lane, but the negative side is more maintenance, snow plowing. Actually, we heard some reports from the RCMP about more increased theft and vandalism if you can access your backyards as opposed to not having a lane. So there might be some negatives and costs associated with that as well. My question is this also going to go to public/developer feedback?
yes. Yeah, we're working with the development and the developers and the public, and we have had a meeting with them. But I think, Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong. Did we talk very much about the small lot? It was mainly the sort of technical details of the subdivision servicing bylaw. Oops. Oh, you're on mute or something.
And I guess while we're waiting for that, the reason I'm asking for the development input is because all of this, if we do make decisions, all of this will be passed on to the developer to put in the double sidewalk, to put in the boulevards, to put in all these other pieces, to put in the lanes. And if that's going to reduce the size of the lot, that may have some negative connotations that we need to hear about.
Right. Yeah, and we will be engaging with the development community on that.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Oh, well, there we go. Now we can hear you.
Apologies. Yeah, the small, we're focusing on the small lot work that then will feed into the overall subdivision servicing bylaw, and then there's engagement planned with the development community. As a part of our work plan too, there will also be for the small lot work some AutoCAD drawings and some very high level cost estimates to look at the cost of the proposed changes, and so that will be presented as a part of the community engagement. So, the community and the development community can see some high level example costs of what it looks like.
Certainly from my perspective, I agree with Councillor Ray. I think we discussed the sidewalk issue a couple of years ago or last year, and just from certainly cost effective perspective, one side, stick with one side. As far as boulevards, I'm really not in favor of boulevards. If you drive through town right now, I bet you 3 out of 4 aren't maintained anyways. You assume people would think or realize that that's their responsibility, but they're not. So, they become unsightly. They really do. So they're not cared for at this point in time. I say going forward, forget about boulevards. And the only thing I got is, and it's not to do with this bylaw, but considering the building footprint increase on a lot, that we can increase the footprint on the percentage that we have now. That just makes more
Right.
sense because, you know, there's just so many people nowadays, they're not maintaining their properties. So why wouldn't we just expand the building footprint on there and limit the amount of maintenance they have to do? I got Councillor Sketsy, then I got Councillor Popoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So if we're going through all four, my time in municipal government, lanes have certainly been an issue. People complaining about their back lane not being plowed, people concerned about where their garbage cans go or their recycling cans go or not go. So I personally would not be in favor of lanes. I agree a sidewalk on one side of the street makes the most sense from a maintenance perspective going forward. Personally, I like boulevards with street trees on them. I do think that improves the neighborhood.
Thank you, Councillor Popoff.
Oh, thank you. So listening around the table, if this is sort of a no-go, not interested issue for council, if that is the case, do we just want to put a stop to it right now and not incur any more staff or consulting time on this? Or do we
No,
want-
we're not here to make decisions.
Well, no, but I understand that.
Maybe the whole meeting, so.
There's a desire around the table that this is sort of a no-go area, not interested, then we could, when we bring it back into another forum, just put the kibosh on it. Or we want to incur the staff and the consultant and the public effort to give us the same result that we think we already know.
Yeah. Well, Council, certainly I think that staff are getting a pretty good idea of, you know, the conversation here, getting a feel for it, and we'll let them decide what they want to do going forward. Councilor Ray?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we've made a commitment and we've clarified as a council that when we're directing staff, we do it as a complete body. And so for those kinds of directions, my understanding is we would need a motion and then need to vote on council. So we just want to be careful, I think, that we're not throwing direction out there and kind of implying to management that they should take a certain direction. So if we want to do things like that, whether today or other days, we do need a formal motion and a formal vote.
Councilor Brissette?
Thank you. With regard, again, I'm not a big fan of boulevards, as was cited about maintenance and lack thereof. But street trees, I've always been in favor of on main roads. I tried to encourage that along Second Street coming in from the highway, but I was told we have lots of trees in this area, and no. And I thought that was an error at that time, but that was a decision made by a former member of council. But I do think it's really important for livability and climate assistance as the world heats up and our summers get increasingly hot and smoky. Street trees are really important. I've also heard from staff about them being very expensive, but they're an important part of our community, and I think they need to be something we need to emphasize moving forward on main arterial roads.
Anything further, Council? Oh, very good. So thank you very much, Joel, Helene. That was a very productive day. A lot of information, a lot for council to think about going forward. I think it's certainly a lot of it was a good eye opener for council. And, you know, obviously being an election year, we've got lots to think about here. But this council, I believe in, you know, when we first formed, you know, our mindset was we'll make the hard decisions if and when we have to make them. So we really appreciate all the information. It's it does make a huge difference on the decisions we make. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I did have one last slide just on the next steps of this subdivision servicing bylaw. And we're just gonna like one thing that I'm picking up is, okay, lanes are concerned, but we still have the issue if you get the lots, because another thing we can do is do a bit more thinking. If you get like really narrow lots, like for example, the one that the example that we showed up here, Pinnacle Crescent, where you got really quite narrow lots, then we may need to do a bit more thinking about the servicing conflicts and some approaches to those things. So another thing we might do is think, okay, if you got really narrow lots, maybe we got to think about where we're putting the utilities and how we address those. Anyways, on to the process. So we've got fall 2025. We're going to be making some recommendations, putting together a memo, and then we'll review those, and we'll, obviously, what you're telling us is something that we need to think about very carefully. So we'll take that back and think that through. And yes, perhaps we're not going to be proceeding with some of those aspects of it. And then we'll be having a draft subdivision servicing bylaw. And bear in mind, the subdivision servicing bylaw covers a vast array of things that need to be done. And so these were some specific points we wanted to take to yourselves to get your thoughts on how to proceed. And we've got that. So we really appreciate that. So yeah, that was just wanted to kind of like finish that up. And that concludes all the presenting. And yeah, thank you very much for your time and your input. We really appreciate that. We'll
Thank you,
take
John. I'll
that,
just throw it around the
backwards.
table one more time. Any further questions? We've got Councillor Stetsky has one quick question.
Just a quick question. Can we have street trees without a boulevard to put them on?
Councillor Stetsky, through the mayor, that's one of the biggest challenges that we do see is if we are going to be putting in trees that need to be in our right-of-way and boulevard space. That is the tough balance. I would also like to recognize that, yes, there is a lot of great funding for getting new trees. So it's not necessarily the capital cost of getting the new trees. I've been trying to keep 3 new trees alive at my house for the last few years, and it is a challenge. And that's where making sure that we respect the operational requirements and the challenges of our Public Works Department, as we already do have a pretty big parks and tree inventory. But it's duly noted, and it's something we've talked about. Are there ways through some of these programs? What we've like to explore is, could we access funding where people could put trees in their front yards that provide the same benefit? They own and maintain them while they're maintaining their yard, and we can seek both ways. In the larger, bigger boulevard spaces, arterial roads, there is certainly that benefit to do that as well. So we'll take that all into consideration.
Thank you. That's it, Council. Good. So thanks again, guys. Much appreciated, and we look forward to following this as the draft comes forward and decisions are going to be made. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll sign off then.
Yeah, thanks so much. And with that, that's all we have on the agenda for today. And I'll get a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Popoff, Councillor Peabody, all in favor? We're adjourned. Thanks very much.